Today I want to talk to you guys about splines. All right. So far, I'm over here in the Create tab. All right. So far, we've been working with parametric volumetric objects, right? Volumetric primitives, boxes, spheres, etc. All right, and they're described by their parameters as opposed to being editable by their sub-objects, such as their vertices, edges, and things like that. We'll get into that more later. But obviously, you can't create as very realistic scenes just using these simple primitives, right? So the first way that we can look at to make more interesting objects is to create two-dimensional shapes, vectors or splines, and then project them into three-dimensional volume by lofting them, extruding them, lathing them, okay, which we'll all look at. So to create splines, you're in the Create panel, and it's just, and again, when I say create, I don't mean create. And when I say modifiers, I don't mean up here, okay? You can do this stuff up here too, but let's just stick to one place just to, there's enough variables as it is. Anyway, in Create, the second little button there is for splines, all right? And all of these are simple parametric shapes, meaning described by their parameters, except for line, which is free-form Beziers, all right? And now, so this tool is a little tricky. We'll, of course, look at it, but if you are currently in my basic computer graphics class or have ever taken it, you sort of have a leg up, because in there, in Adobe Illustrator has basically the same tool, and we spend a lot of time looking at it there. So let me just create a circle to see how it looks. So there's a circle, okay? And this is just a vector. If I were to F9 and, oops, it's over here on the screen, and to render that, nothing happens, okay? Splines by themselves are not renderable. They can be made renderable, but they're not at the moment. Now, when you create these things, I would suggest always working in one flat viewport, like I'm in the front viewport right now. You might want to avoid working in the perspective viewport, see, because when you're working with splines, you probably want to keep everything coplanar, meaning like it's all in the same, drawn on the same piece of paper, more or less. And if you're extruding or something like that, and you have compound splines, and they're out of sync a little bit in that axis, it won't work. So, so anyway, just like create them don't create them in the perspective viewport is the short story there. So if I go to modify, all right, you can see that, like I said, it's a parametric object, meaning it's described by its parameters, and I can change those. All right. And let's look at, and all of these parametric objects can be converted to editable splines just by right-clicking and convert to, and there's a bunch of options here, but editable spline would be the one you want. But let's look at the rendering and interpolation first before we go on. So rendering, because these first two are available if it's an editable spline also. And so we'll just look at them here. So this thing doesn't render, okay? Mostly we're going to use them for, like I said, extruding, lathing, etc. But if I turn on enable in renderer and enable in viewport, now you can see that it's kind of, oops, wrong viewport. Just so we can look at it here. It has some volume to it, right? And I can make it thick. Okay, so it's like a torus, right? So you can give some volume to it. I'll turn on F4 so we can see the edges of it. And you can make it change the number of sides on it down to 3. And you can also, if there's a small number of sides, I can rotate that like this. And it can also be like a tube. Right, so we can do all this with just a line. It's much easier than take like, we could take two circles and extrude them, but keep in mind that a lot of times you can just do things with a renderable line. And some of this other stuff, not so important, but just make sure you can turn it. You can leave it off in the viewport and still have it render. All right. I don't have, usually I just turn both of these on at the same time. Okay. So I'm going to turn them both off. And let's look at interpolation. So interpolation is the thing that's in 3ds Max. There's no, in the program, there's no place that's truly, I don't think, at least not the tools we're using, a pure curve, right? The curves are always made up of little tiny short steps. And you want to, the way that they're actually represented in the 3D software, and you want to make it so you don't see those little steps usually, right? You're trying to make it look like a smooth curve. If something's way off in the distance, part of a spaceship that you can barely see or something like that, you can have this set very low because you always want to keep your geometry as simple as possible. But if something's up close, this number might need to be higher. So interpolation is the number of flat steps between the vertices, okay, on a curve. So, and you have no way of knowing it, but the way 3ds Max presents a circle here is to have 4 vertices, right? So there's 6 steps 4 times around this thing. It's not very obvious in a circle because it's still parametric, but it's following the rules as though it's not. But if I were to convert this into an editable spline, you'd see there's 4 vertices and there's 6 steps there. Optimize and adaptive, we don't really need to worry about that too much. Optimize just means that if there's a place in your line that's flat with no curve, it just won't put these 6 steps in, right? And optimize means it varies the number, it varies the length of the steps, okay, to try to keep the number needed. Adaptive doesn't work, and for certain situations it creates problems. So I usually just leave this alone, and I just adjust the number of steps as needed. Right. So if I get close to this thing, you can see the steps there. So if I turn this up to maybe 12, just to double it, okay, you still see it a little bit. Maybe 24 or something, but you don't want to go, don't go putting 200 on this or something like that. But just when you're building models, just remember that this is an option that needs to be controlled. Okay, once we go and say we lathe this thing to make something with radial symmetry, the number of steps in the lathe modifier, okay, will determine how many steps there are that way, but along the profile, it will be set by interpolation. So, but I'll remind you when we actually get to that. Put this back to 6. All right, so let's go and look now at working with lines, because that's really the main issue here. Because drawing these things is pretty simple. All right, now one other point though. If I make another object, right, it is now it's just a separate object, right? But there is a start new shape here. Whereas if I uncheck that and create a circle now, they are actually one shape, okay? They're a compound spline. And since it's, by doing that, it automatically converts it to an editable spline. And you will see that its sub-object types now are, vertex, segment, and spline, and it's completely different from the way it looked before with just those simple parameters, okay? Because the very act of turning off start new shape just makes it into an editable spline. But let's go directly to lines here. And let me get rid of my circle. All right, line. So I'm going to click around. Straight segments are relatively easy to do, right? But if I click and drag, it makes a curve. All right. And like I said, if you've done Adobe Illustrator or been in my basic computer graphics class, you know that how this thing is working. And when you're dragging on it, it's actually pulling out these tangents or handles that control the spline or control how the line flows through the vertex. But 3ds Max doesn't show them to you while you're drawing it, but when you edit it, then you see the tangents, and I'll demonstrate. So if I want to close this shape, which you normally would if you're trying to make a 3D volume, if it's not quite closed, if you just click near it or something, it won't work. It has to be closed. So I'm going to click there, and it says close spline. Yeah, please. All right. So now I'm going to go to modify, and I have these 3 sub-object types, right? Vertex, segment, or spline, and I can activate them either here in the selection area. See, there's vertex, segment. Oh, there we are. Spline. And I can also do 1, 2, and 3 on the keyboard to go between them. Okay. So this is the first time that we've been in a sub-object type, and you're frequently in that in 3ds Max, particularly when we're working with editable polygons or editable 3-dimensional objects. So this is the first time we're just doing it with 2D objects. But when we're down in the sub-object type, we're in vertex, segment. Segment is just a piece of the spline between 2 vertices, or spline, which is the entire thing, right? When you're in the sub-object type, you always have to exit out of it afterwards, okay? Usually you can't just go on and try to do other things when you're in the sub-object type. So to get out of it, just click on the word line, and that takes you up out of it. Or if I hit 1 to go into vertex mode and then hit 1 again, it takes me out. So just if you find that you can't go on in certain situations, it might be because you're still in the sub-object type. All right, so I'm in vertex, and if I click on this vertex, there you can see those tangents or handles, okay? And I can drag them, edit it by dragging that. More curve to make it longer, less curve makes it shorter. I can rotate it around, okay? Now this is very clunky looking because this is a lot of curve for an interpolation of only 6. So let me fix that. So for whatever reason, these things can be moved up and down, and I probably at some point just dragged interpolation down. You should be able to move it up. Oh. Okay, I'm going to leave it at the bottom anyway because that's not something I need to change very often. And let me make this double this to 12. Okay, about 20. Yeah, looking good. All right. Anyway, I'm in vertex. There's this selection rollout here has a lot of stuff, but we don't really. It's not stuff we really need, so I'm just going to skip over it. Same thing with soft selection. We don't need that, particularly in this context. However, geometry has a whole lot of tools in it. Holy cow, look at all that stuff. And a lot of that is good stuff that we can use. But let's just look at editing this spline at the moment. So I can move these around, right? Click on vertices and move them. Click on these and change them, all right? Now, actually, if you're not experienced with drawing with Beziers, when you first try to draw something with this tool, you're going to find it surprisingly difficult, Okay, so you'll need to be able to, until you practice enough with it, you'll need to be able to edit a little bit. Now, so this seesaw looking thing are tangents, right? The two parts are always stuck together like that. And we need to be able to break that so we can move one without the other. So if I right click on the vertex, we get our quad menu, right? And right up here, this quad menu, I don't think we've discussed it before. It's just the right click menu, and it's always different pretty much depending on, some parts are consistent, but it really depends on what you right click on. So right here, you'll see Bezier corner, okay, Bezier, corner, and smooth, okay, and reset tangents. Smooth is not part of the Bezier tool set. It just kind of like, it's actually a different algorithm, which to me is not useful. It's just if you put a bunch of points, vertices, it kind of just makes a smooth curve that sort of follows, is influenced by the points, whereas the Bezier ones is it's much more easily definable. Okay. Anyway, it's set to this one right now that this one here that we right clicked on is set to Bezier. If I make a corner, okay, it throws the two handles away. Okay. If I go back to Bezier, it puts them new there. You don't know how it's going to come out, but it just throws them back in. But if I make it Bezier corner, that one. Okay, see now it broke the seesaw, and I can adjust them like this. And if I want to go back, I can just go back to Bezier. Right. So we have control of the vertex types here. Let's see. I'm just going to point out a few things at the moment in here that are particularly useful. Refine is add vertices. Okay, I find that term to be very annoying. I mean, I guess it makes sense, but it should just say add or something like that. I don't know. But if I hit refine and I'm right on the, see, it just puts new points in there. Okay. You want to use the minimum number of points possible to make a line, but if you need more detail or something in the area, refine is an option. I'm just going to turn it back off again. Let's say, let's look at fuse and weld. Let me take a segment and delete it. Okay, so now this is open, right? And I'm in vertex mode. Now this geometry, we're in the geometry section, right? This is going to be slightly different depending on whether you're in vertex segment or spline. Most of the time we're going to be in vertex dealing with vertices, and sometimes in spline. Segment, it's not that many options or not many reasons to do stuff there. Okay, mostly vertex. There's weld and fuse, okay? And I'll just point these out because fuse takes 2 points and puts them on top of each other, okay? But it doesn't actually seal them shut. So if I take this vertex, and remember control is, have we talked about that? Control adds to the selection in 3ds Max. Yeah, and Alt subtracts from the selection set, unlike in Adobe stuff where it's just shift to add or subtract. Here you have 2 separate keys. Okay, I'm totally spaced on whether we talked about this already or not. So control lets me select multiple objects, and Alt lets me deselect them, objects or sub-objects. Okay, control add, Alt subtract. So I selected these 2 endpoints. And if I could manage it, I could just mark here on both of them, but I don't think I can do that right here without hitting some other ones. So I selected those 2 endpoints. So if I hit fuse, they just move together to a central point. But they're actually not, if I move now, it looks like it's welded together, but it's not. They're just on top of each other. If I click off of it and then just click on one, if I marquee, I get them both again, right? But if I just click on one, you can see that it's really not welded shut. And you need to, if you're trying to make a 3D volume, it has to be closed. I'm just pointing this out because a lot of times people draw a shape and then they don't quite close it at the end. And you need to be able to fix that. So fuse and then weld. Okay, so weld just welds it shut. And now if I just click on it and move it, you'll see, yeah, it's closed. Now this is something we'll probably look at more later, but fillet and chamfer are kind of useful. Zoom in close on here. If I go to fillet, and I can actually interactively do it right here with my cursor, or I can drag this number up and down. Okay, so fillet curves it. All right, you'll notice that I'm clicking on the spinner and dragging. Okay, you can't click up on the spinner arrow because one click executes it. So if I just click up on this little arrow, it does one, but then I can't do another one, right? Because it did it and deselected the vertex. So I'm holding, but if I hold down on the spinner like this, I can do that, right? Or I'm just doing Control Z here. I can go right there and drag this up and down until I like it. So it makes a round corner, okay? And this is important when you round your corners, okay, in something like this. If you look at manufactured objects or like any kind of object, when they have a corner, it's not like infinitely sharp corner. Okay, it's got a small amount of radius. If I look around at the edge of my monitor and all the different, the door, everything, there's a little radius to the corner. Okay, and putting that particular little detail in, a small radius on the edges of everything, will make your image look realistic and not like crappy computer graphics. Because when you have a corner, right, if it's a pure corner with no radius like this, it just doesn't, it's just the two flat planes. Whereas if there's a little bit of radius and your object is somewhat reflective, that radius, the reflection from that radius looks, say it's like a 90-degree angle. Okay, it's kind of hard to describe, but the reflection from the radius looks out at the whole 90 degrees of the scene. So reflections will tend to pile up on those rounded corners. Okay, and so if you take like just a cube, like say, like a Rubik's cube or a dice or something like that, where the corner is a little bit rounded, and you hold it, you'll see all these highlights appear on it, but they're all mostly on the edges. Okay, some sheen on the flat pieces, on the fillet of the edges. Okay, and if you don't have them, it just looks very flat and dead and like very old school computer graphic-y, not in a good way. So that's a detail to remember. If I back up here a little bit, I can also do chamfer, which just puts a single flat piece instead of a curve there, okay, which is often useful too. It'll kind of do the same thing by just having an extra little piece in there. It's I do fillet more often, but sometimes there's situations where you want chamfer. Okay. Okay. This will, when we go into extruding and lasing things, you'll see right away, which we'll do next after we cover splines. You'll see how this works. And remember, I have to turn these off. One more thing here before we go on is, let's see, under spline. There's a couple of things here dealing regarding compound objects. add and outline and Boolean and attach are things of interest. I'm just kind of like skipping a lot of stuff and focusing on what I think you can really use out of here. So I hope you guys don't mind having a whole lot of buttons floating around that you don't know what they do. Any one of them, if you want, you can just investigate further, but I'm trying to stick to stuff we can really use right here. Now, outline, I'll just point that out first. We'll use this if we lay the vase or something and we want to have some thickness to the clay, so it's not like lathed out of a piece of paper. We can do outline like this. Okay, so it creates a piece of, it creates a double line, right? And you'll see you got to be careful because, and this is one where I'm not letting go of the mouse until I like it. Because if you try to do it again, it'll do a double one and you'll have all self-intersecting stuff. So one thing is that you can't have self-intersecting splines, like when you're creating, like you can see how I've gone a little bit too far and there's multiple, I can't let go of the mouse, so I'm pointing with my hand, but there's multiple places where it self-intersects. This will create a bad object that won't render properly. So I have to be careful to not go too far, or maybe it'll be easier if I go outside. And you might have to then go in and edit afterwards. But outline is really useful. I'm going to undo that, and that's under spline. Okay. Boolean, okay, lets you combine multiple splines by adding a union, okay, subtraction, which is the same as minus front in Illustrator, and intersection, which is not so useful, but it just creates, it's just where two objects intersect is what you're left with, which I almost never need to use, but union and subtraction I use all the time. For Boolean to work, I had trouble with this for a while because I never read the manual when I was first working this program. They have to be both parts of the same same compound spline. So to make a compound spline, there's two ways to do it. Right? I have this spline, and let's say I want to add another one. Okay. If I turn off Start New Shape and this one's selected, okay, now they're a compound object. Or if I don't do Start New Shape, so you can see that that's not selected anymore. Okay, I hit G to turn off the grid there. Okay, now it's two separate objects. If I go back to my spline here and I go to modify and I'm in spline mode, I can hit use attach. Okay, and I go to attach and I click on that and turn off attach, and now they're a single compound object, single compound spline. So either create it with Start New Shape turned off, or with one selected in spline mode, attach the other one. Okay, so now this is a single line that includes two splines. See, I can click on this one and this one's active. So this is why spline is actually a sub-object type. You don't see it as a sub-object until you have compound objects. Hope I'm not getting too far in the weeds here with this, but we're almost as deep as we're going to go. So if I select one of these splines and go to Boolean, that's what I wanted to demonstrate. So I turn on Boolean and I'm in union, okay? And if I click on this guy, ta-da, so it did that. I'm going to undo it. And if I do subtraction and click on this guy, oh, didn't have Boolean on. Okay, it subtracts that from it. So this is frequently useful, and when we go into to extrude, you'll see how. So I'm just kind of pointing it out at the moment. So let's see if there's anything else useful here. At the moment, I think that covers working with lines for the most part.